much. Actually, Joanne asked me to do 3 things. So before I get to that bit, I used to be a producer, so she suggested I reflect a bit about remembering producing and remembering production, the title of this series. And I left the world of television to explore the affordances, I suppose, of the World Wide Web and the internet, a very different world. And then left that to start thinking about who's studying what when it comes to digital media. If I'd actually heard everything I've heard before, I would have approached my talk differently. I've been a producer of material that is in archives now. I've been a producer who's used material from archives in the dim and distant past, where we had archive budgets and archive researchers and development budgets and recce's and all sorts of fantastic things people don't have anymore. And I'm now doing an academic project which is probably laying down some foundations for an archive of the future. So had I thought about it, I would have approached it that way, but we're going to have to go through my slightly more pedantic thoughts. So thank you very much for asking me. It really, as a few speakers have said, a rare opportunity to reflect on a number of things that we just do in our daily jobs. And producing media is as personal, I think, as writing a book. At least my experience of working in what I used to call television felt like that. And I left it by choice when I realized that, for me at least, it became just a business, just a production line. And that's when I was in a commissioning team at the BBC, and there was no time really to think about anything very much at all. So I've often wondered if I left television or if television left me. But of course that begs the question of what is television, and that is a question that was asked earlier on today. Different commentators talk about different things. Some people talk about the box in the room with a flat screen, Wi-Fi or attached to a cable or satellite, the thing you congregate around or don't. The content, a word we're no longer allowed to use, and I put in brackets video, seen on said screen, or another portable screen. Is it a screen format? The storytelling, the documentary, the content in an archive or in your memory, is that television? Or the industry, the business of television, whether that's a corporation, company, a national export, and of course including cable in the USA, which is structured very differently from our own business here. Or, as I used to think about it when I started in the early days of Channel 4, a cultural intervention into the public sphere, something that sent stories and messages out for thinking and sharing and who knows what. Also the memories of media workers, production stories, the experiences of working in television organisations, and I know many of you are thinking about all of these different things. I think you probably call it all television. So, my own thoughts have evolved with time gone by, a lot of time in my case, nearly 3 decades, and many of the debates around the future of television still persist in the same form as they were in the past, but amongst new players. And before we get there, I'm going to look back briefly. I know that I only got a look into working in television because of the birth of Channel 4. I had tried to get into the BBC. I got quite far in various applications, but I was a woman at the time, and that was really very risky, I think, in the formal training schemes. I was offered a job producing talks for Radio 3, and I took one look at the long corridors with closed doors and the sort of funny old feeling about it, and I took the other job that I was offered, which was to produce talks at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, which then was a much sort of funkier, more open, youthful place. But what I did was I started organising a series of workshops and seminars about different aspects of the media. And in the sort of early to mid-80s, they were the first public talks about the media, apart from professional talks at the Edinburgh Television Festival. And they were really, really popular. People queued to come in, and we got professionals and the public talking together about what they wanted from television, what was going on in television, all sorts of theoretical but also very, very practical debates. And I think that the program makers liked it. So it got me really thinking about all of the experiments that Channel 4 was doing, and I was very excited, and eventually I ended up producing documentaries for Channel 4. And why was it exciting? I think it was exciting because it unleashed the potential for new people to come in to the business, but also new voices to be heard on television. And importantly, I think new experiments with grammar of storytelling that were already known elsewhere in drama and by different practitioners, but not really very much in the mainstream at all, and not really in news, and not really in documentaries. And it really was a time where you could break in. And I think it's an important time because I'm not sure anyone is going to have much of that kind of experience again, or be able to experiment with a very diverse set of structures and grammars that we worked in producing independent film and video or news, at least not within television. And what I remember of the environment was that the hard, sort of physical, character-forming environment, pulling teams together, strength of vision of a lot of people to get anything commissioned at all, the belief that the subject was valuable beyond any calculations of ratings, and actually the relative lack of any critical dialogue with peers, which I think was surprising given the sort of fermenting of ideas. And producing is very akin to creative facilitating, but sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. And I've been wondering what remains apart from some old videotape, and whether it in fact is in an archive. I mean, I know that some of my films, rushes are in archives in South Africa. I made films during the state of emergency in South Africa. I went out pretending to be a tourist. And because the landscape changed there so much, these rushes were requested, and we were allowed to send them over. But I began to understand the importance of the source material in different contexts over time. You know, even if I couldn't get my hands on it, somebody else might be able to in the future, somewhere more relevant to their future perhaps than mine. It was also a time where training people while you worked was a really, really big part of the job, and something that I think there is no time for now, and no budget for now. But in the old independent film and film budgets at Channel 4, there was a training budget. We had to train someone, and we wanted to train people, and I think that is a sorely sort of missed opportunity. So as I said, it was a chance to create what felt like new grammar for television, and I think perhaps it's been underestimated and under-researched. My next decade was really, on the back of my work in South Africa, I was invited to join the BBC, in fact, to put together an archive night, funnily enough, around the first free elections in South Africa. I'd become a bit of an expert who was producing what, and this fantastic idea the BBC had for a very grandiose night sadly fell away very quickly as the costs of putting it together became apparent to some higher up people. And I learnt some of my early lessons in what it was like to work in a big institution. And the debates that I witnessed, certainly from the sort of early 90s to about 2000, were really all about the advent of the word that Tony's told us not to use, content, and the fact that you had to be someone really famous, maybe John Pilger, to make a film with any point of view. That increasingly observational films and reality came to dominate the form known as documentary. And factual programs became very, very homogenized, as did the commissioning of factual programmings. And television per se seemed to be a rather redundant term. People used to think that channels would become redundant, that the programs would be their own brands and audiences would come to them alone, wherever these programs lived. The fight for attention was really the first attempt at more ethnographic or ethnographic-friendly research methods. Just who would be watching at 10 o'clock at night was a question that was frequently asked. I remember commissioning the Henley Centre for the first time to impress a scary new boss to help us determine what programs we might commission into that slot and why. And that kind of research is very common now, but then not at all. There was no real idea who was out there at any one time. The main issues of the late 90s and early 2000s within the BBC and elsewhere was over which was to be the dominant platform: broadcasting, satellite, or IP, Internet Protocol. The stuff that's shown on the platform and the programs and content was not really discussed that much at the time, at least where I was. So in the early 90s, the early smart TVs were being talked about in R&D circles, there were still very few television types who knew anything at all about the internet or the World Wide Web until about 1997. And the web, at least at the BBC, was originally considered some form of additional publishing arm, considered to be very small beer, even at the time of the launch of News 24 in 1997, the same time as the launch of News Online, though there were one or two prescient people who predicted the latter would be much bigger in time. And what happened to commissioning of television content at that time? I was supporting the commissioning of documentaries and factual programs made by independent producers, and I saw at first hand what was happening with commissioning with the alleged existence of preferred supplier lists, which did exist, and an ever-diminishing scale of producers or production companies getting through. It didn't feel like the industry I had joined as an eager outsider, just a lot of consolidation. Am I sounding jaded? I left television, or at least the part of the BBC that made television programmes or commissioned television programmes, in a leap of faith and boredom in about 2000, and I jumped at the chance to join a newly formed and structurally rather free-floating experimental space called BBC Imagineering to explore what was coming in the days when we talked about broadband, always-on, interactive TV, and EPGs. Seems like a long time ago. I became very, very interested by the possibilities and affordances of the internet and the World Wide Web, and actually relished the chance to think conceptually again about the meaning of what would be produced and the possibilities that might come. I explored complexity, systems thinking, serendipity, how to find and represent divergent points of view in a way that really was long gone in the thinking that I'd come across in television. My own research projects look at how people use their visual skills more than perhaps other sense skills on the internet. I wondered why the industry didn't go down that route. I looked at the semantic web possibilities and how content might actually find you in the future. And this was very early, in 2001 and 2002. I started looking at the military blogs that were launched in 2001 and 2002, and then worked to get the BBC to start blogging, which took fully another 3 to 4 years to get the organisation to do it. And I liked that because it brought back to me a sense of participation in a public debate, a sense of participation in a public debate that I'd found at Channel 4 that had been lost, really, I found within television, apart from news programmes which really didn't reflect public debate. They reflected political or Westminster debate. And so the participatory nature of what was coming on the internet I found really, really exciting. In fact, all of the values that I thought were interesting about television earlier on re-emerged for me when I visited MIT Media Lab and other labs and saw students really grappling with the same kind of issues that I thought television had been trying to grapple with in the early 80s. How to represent community, how to think about society, how to make the world a better place, all very idealistic stuff. So, back to the present. Last year, I concluded that everything I enjoyed researching and thinking about then, in 2000, is utterly mainstream now. In the converged and connected world, the preoccupations of TV folk, are they different, really, from they were then? And are they, in fact, interesting questions for researchers? I'm not sure. 2013 has been referred to by many as a bit of a turning point for television, whether that be cable in the USA, or the advent of consumer smart televisions, linking your internet and mobile applications to your TV screens, or the capacity of providers to bypass paid television models and go straight to the internet. What's called unbundling in the States, how the programs are going to be separated from the cable networks, and how much people will pay or won't pay for quality, new business models for delivery. All of the new entrants like Hulu and Netflix and Amazon, as well as crowdfunding, are being noticed, at least. And then some people would say they're taking over. And unbundling in the TV in the USA is really the same as a kind of disaggregation that is possible when you start thinking about the internet. And it looks like the TV industry is really possibly finally coming to terms with some of the implications of these changes. But now, as a researcher, rather than someone engaged in thinking current industry thoughts, I'm really looking at how organizations deal with disruption, how they try to tame it, how they try to take it over or come to terms with it, but also how organizations lay down their own future, a bit like fine wine, how they write themselves into history and how they record their memories and impressions, and what that's going to mean for researchers in the future looking back at this period. And so my current project is about media and memories. I try and piece together a series of memories about the BBC's first 20 years online. And this at a time with the 25th anniversary of the World Wide Web, 30 years of Apple, 10 years of Facebook. The time is now really to delve into the interplay of computers and television, the interplay of participatory media, social media and access media, the battles between the distribution platforms, open versus closed, and the endeavor of the makers, the creators and entrepreneurs, and all between. So while this project is a combination of oral history interviews, archive search, informal talks, memories, personal document searches and personal recollection, which itself can be broken down into body memories, memories of battles, conversations, as well as programs I've made, websites, blog posts, etc., it turns out that collecting memories is in itself productive. It produces new things in itself. People produce memories, they find documents from their attics, they give you leads. Sometimes these encounters are therapeutic. They enable closure. They enable people to tell their stories fully, perhaps for the first time. And sometimes it's fundamental. And what if the organization you're researching hasn't kept everything you might expect it to have kept? Or if it hasn't, it's not entirely sure where it may have kept it. By charting this territory of the recent past, we lay down the foundations for future generations of researchers too. The archaeology of a project, as Bill Thompson suggested to me, rather than the actual project. I actually think they're both, the archaeology of future projects and the actual project of the present. But one thing's clear, and as memory leaves the organization or the enterprise or the actual text or the program, it leaves a gap for things to be done again, for wheels to be reinvented, or things to be made anew, or not at all. Things are rarely linear. And the disruption in television, or the future of television, is perhaps only starting now, but with a much greater complexity than that the newer platforms bring. And for those researching the changes now, rather than looking back into the formerly known as television archive, it's beholden on you to come to grips with some of the very big changes taking place, not only in terms of production tools, distribution platforms, but also, and again, viewers' needs and habits in global and disaggregated marketplaces, and their own capacity to produce, and their own productions and memories. Thank you very much.